Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Managed IT Lunch and Learn by Knoxville Technology Council. At this time, we're going to be bringing up Katie Bush, who will be taking it away as our program MC. Katie, come on.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to K-Tech's Managed IT virtual event. We're very excited that you've joined us. If you have not already, you will meet our panelists for today's event. My name is Katie Bush, and I work for Avertium, formerly known as Sword and Shield. I'm a senior account executive in the Greater Eastern Tennessee region. As many of you know, K-Tech seeks to connect, develop, promote, and advocate for the technology industry in the Greater Knoxville region. We believe that technology industry is essential for our community to thrive. Don't forget to check out the website at knoxtech.org to learn more. And if you aren't a member, we hope you'll consider joining. The best way to see all the future events is on the website. There is an events tab that you can look at. And please consider joining the email list as well. But a few of the events coming up are the UX Lunch and Learn event on July 8th, the Marketing for Tech event on July 15th, the K-Tech Virtual Happy Hour on July 28th, and there'll also be an announcement coming out about a Women in Tech workshop that will take place in July. We'd also love to give a big thank you to Lunchpool for virtually hosting today's event. This platform has been an excellent reroute for our events, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to support one of our local member companies. At this time, I'd like to introduce our sponsor, RoundTower. I hope you've gotten a chance to connect with them in the lounge, but if not, make your way over to their lounge in the post-event networking to connect with them. I'd like to introduce Michael Swiencki. Michael serves as Vice President of Managed Services at RoundTower. Michael, come on stage.
Thanks, Katie. Hopefully you can see me and hear me. I hope so. I'm going to start a screen share here. And let's see if I can choose the screen. All right, give me 1 second, folks. So while I'm trying to get this multi-screen configuration to work, let me see if this is better. All right, allow. I'll just minimize myself. So if somebody from the moderator, if you can't hear me or you stop seeing me for some reason, just please interrupt and we will allow. Is it possible for someone to confirm that they can see this?
Well, everything looks great on our end.
Awesome. Sorry, just technical difficulties there. So the intent of this presentation here, it's going to be very short. It's not intended to be a commercial for RoundTower, and it's really just to start the discussion as far as why, really breaking down that why of looking to manage IT solutions. So I like to start off these conversations with the world is changing. The world of IT is changing. The way that we interact with IT systems are changing, right? The location of our data, our services that we utilize and interface with on a daily basis is changing. And of course, we're working from home. This is week 14 for me here in quarantine in Northern Kentucky. But so really all of this is changing across the IT platform. And, what we really need to look for is ways on how we adapt to that to really solve the challenges that our businesses are really facing there. So, why do we want to look at managed IT for the future to build, run, manage, and connect? So to break it down, and not from a sales perspective, it solves the business challenges and then allows clients to realize value. In cases, it reduces the total cost of ownership. For groups that already have IT staff, it frees up those resources to really focus on strategic initiatives internally for the organization. No one's better to really lead up those projects than the folks that already have the relationships from a business perspective inside of the organization, and really accelerate and gain some velocity with those initiatives to really allow those businesses to thrive. The complexity with traditional hiring, you need to hire the right resource for all the different types of technologies that you have, or be willing to train them for any type of investment that you're looking for in the future. So you really have to make that right hire choice when you're building your team, but also as the world is changing, right? How does that team adapt? The improved productivity. So this is really around, how organizations are best utilizing the tools and investments that they have. And a great example of this is really with the situation that we're dealing with today, where I know RoundTower ourselves had a lot of clients who were on the O365 platform, had entitlements to various different types of service with their E3 or E5 platforms, but they weren't really using it to collaborate. Great example is Microsoft Teams, right? And today that has moved and shifted dramatically to being the number one platform that we're seeing on the RoundTower managed services side for clients to interact. So in that improved productivity, right, for those clients, we were there. We were able to allow them to utilize that service more effectively and really reduce that complexity and their speed to use that. From the flexibility perspective, right, managed services partners can really grow and flex as the needs of the business change. And that could be that your organization is growing, right? You need more services, or you need more support, or it could be the opposite, right? Maybe some more efficiency have came into play, and services need to come down a little bit. And having a managed service partner, an MSP, it really allows clients to have that flexibility of service, and be able to decrease or incrementally add, versus a large shift in an FTE type of hire. So from a proactive approach, right, we're focused on keeping systems up and running and preventing failure, and not take advantage of a bad day. So when we start talking about managing IT assets in a reactive break fix manner, right, that's what we're trying to avoid, right? In traditional IT shops, or in some cases, that's really what they're focused on, is really where the incident tickets are coming in from, and focusing all their time, energy on just fixing the problem and then moving on to the next problem. And MSPs, they really, the value that they bring, especially next generation MSPs, is making sure that the monitoring is in place, eyes on glass are there, right? We're looking at various instrumentation points to ensure that we understand what those assets are being used for, those services are being used for, and the triggers that mean that degradation of service is occurring, or lack of service, right? The services has stopped working, and being able to respond quickly and appropriately, and again, not taking advantage of a situation where a client is down, and having some type of T&M type of manner to bring them back up, right? Being that accountable partner to ensure that we're there to provide them with support. So from a consolidation perspective, some of the business goals that are gained there is, there's a lot of different vendors from SaaS providers to hardware vendors for servers, to laptops, right, to different types of software like Microsoft O365 as an example, right? All of these different pieces add some complexity to the IT landscape, and having an MSP there to not only do that vendor relationship, but manage all of those communications. So when there is issues, they're taking that firsthand approach, and really providing value back to the client, so they are not the ones who are having to reach out and gain support through all the various different methods that they can. And really reduce stress, right? This is most MSPs and especially RoundTower, right? We're a true 24/7, 365 environment. So we're not picking up an issue at 8 in the morning that happened at 2 in the morning, right? We're fixing that problem when we start seeing it and respond to that quickly. So we work with a lot of healthcare and higher education where their office might be closed for that period of time, but if they're experiencing an internet outage or a wireless degradation for an aspect of their building, that will impact them come 8 o'clock or 7 a.m. when folks start coming in and start interacting with the services. So MSPs are there to really provide that value to get those services restored and have it really be a non-issue for that business hours organization. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to the moderator, and we can begin the rest of the presentation.
Thanks so much. We appreciate that. All right, at this time, I'd like to go ahead and introduce each of our panelists, and we'll hear from them what their experience with managed IT is and how their organization is utilizing that. First, we have Andy Eckerman. Andy is a vice president with Clayton Homes for the past 3 years and currently leads the Vanderbilt Mortgage Technology team, as well as Clayton's data engineering and analytics organization. Prior to his current role, Andy led Clayton's enterprise shared solutions technology team that included supporting digital marketing, CRM, finance, HR, and ERP functions. Before joining Clayton, Andy worked for Capital One, Allstate, and Accenture in a variety of software engineering, data analytics, architecture, and technology management positions. Andy, I'll let you come up stage and speak for a minute.
Thanks, Katie. I guess hello to all. As far as managed IT and sort of my background as well as Clayton's thoughts on it, we kind of look at managed IT as one part of sort of the spectrum of staffing needs for any technology organization, right? If you start with, where do I have, I want all employees, where do I look at, contractor staff augmentation, where would I might look at time and material, SOW structures, where does like a fixed bid SOW structure fit in, as well as, managed IT, which in and of itself has its own spectrum of, very, very close relationships to delivery and operations, or sort of turnkey, and you really don't have a whole lot involved in it. I don't, my personal perspective is there's no one right answer to this, right? There's pros and cons to each one of those different levers, and there's appropriate times and places for each one of them. So a lot of it is about how do you keep in mind what is the problems that you're solving? What are the constraints that you have? What is it you're looking to get out of it? And also, how do you not make it too complicated, right? There might be a place where it's like, hey, I've got this, niche shop that can do, a very specific thing, but, is it really worth the overhead from a contractual third-party management, relationships, and everything? And sometimes the answer is absolutely. We're doing something brand new. We need the best of the best. We need a very specific skill set, and so it's worth that level of investment. In other cases, that's not the right answer, right? So you want, not just one, but probably a couple of close partners that you do a fair amount of business with that you can go to for, most of your run-of-the-mill sort of needs. And so a lot of it's about how do you keep options available to yourself without getting so many options that you just get overwhelmed by the upkeep, of those different dimensions. At Clayton, we use all of those, all the way from we have teams that are full employee to we have, managed IT services for certain dimensions of our actual business. So happy to speak to anybody or when questions come up about, how do we make the choice on for any given situation, which one of those levers are we going to actually choose to pull? I've also got not as much from Clayton, but more from my experience with Capital One, experience with, a heavy outsourced, technology organization, and actually moving from one outsourced provider to another outsourced provider, which was certainly a learning experience on knowledge transition and letting too much knowledge go, and how do you balance those things, and what does it look like to actually change service providers, which was an experience. And I've also been through an insourcing experience where after switching that service provider, we had gotten to an untenable amount of outsourcing compared to employee, and sort of lost control of our own systems. And so, brought a significant portion of that back in-house. Not all, that wasn't the right answer either, but went through that process as well, and happy to speak about that as well. So that's sort of my background in this space at a high level. Again, happy to answer questions and talk more about it. I think we all desire for this to be interactive, and really want to be kind of meeting people with where they're at and answering the questions that make most sense to them. So thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. Katie, I think hand it back over to you at this point.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Andy. I saw a Q&A real quick, so let me address that. It says, are we all muted when the speaker is on? Yes, you will be. When it's in presentation mode, everyone's camera will be turned off and you are muted. Don't do anything silly, but you are. Okay, on to the next. We have Andre Alves. Andre is currently the Director of IT Service Management at Ministry Brands. He has worked in IT for over 25 years in many different sectors of corporate America, including APL, which is Transportation and Logistics, E-Trade Financial and Banking, Sea Ray, Brunswick Boat Group, Manufacturing, Scripps Networks, which is now Discovery, Media, Team Health, Healthcare, and Ministry Brands Tech. He received his Bachelor of Science in Information Systems and an MBA while working and raising a family. Andre has held many different positions in his career, which have ranged from Director of Solutions Delivery, Systems Operations Manager, Systems Engineer, Linux Unix Administrator. Information technology is his passion, as is mentoring and training the next generation of IT professionals. Andre, if you will please come on stage.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. So my name is Andre Alves, and as Katie said, I work for Ministry Brands, and I'm the Director of IT Service Management. So in my career, I use a host of MSP, both to networking, security, data center services, cloud services, and also for end user support. So I did some research real quick in preparation for this presentation, and the average organization spends 27% of its IT budget on IT outsourcing with managed services. And in IT, that business exceeded $405 billion. And currently at Ministry Brands, we have an array of managed service providers. We use Globant for Operations Command Center, kind of the NOC. We use Avertium for security services. We use Verscience for data center tier 1 work. We use Callahan Consulting for ServiceNow. And we use a company called ATG for Salesforce. So when I'm looking to outsource some IT function, I typically try to think of what kind of unique skills that we cannot afford. As you know, in IT, we have a very limited amount of resources available for the different projects that we have to support. And for the most part, especially currently, we have a very lean IT staff. So having that capability to leverage a managed service provider for some unique skills, like I mentioned in my current situation, we use Salesforce and we use ServiceNow. because we just can't afford to have an army or a team of people to help us maintain that platform. And just based on my experience, some of the advantages and challenges, like Andy mentioned. So what I observed is some of the advantages from leveraging managed service providers. A managed service provider have a much larger talent pool and other resources available to them. A managed service provider always have a better KPI and metrics than we can provide. I believe a managed service provider, they have better coverage. And lastly, a managed service provider, the processes are typically better defined. Now, some of the challenges is, how do you ensure business continuity if you have a fallout with a managed service provider, right? Something else that occurred in the past is managed service providers, sometimes they tend to push for a scope creep and additional cost. So how do you manage that? And, managed service provider are sometimes they're reluctant or unwilling to provide, an SLA. Typically they say the SLA are customized for each customer. I've heard that before. And sometimes you are locked in, so you have a better experience with a managed service provider. How do you get out, right? Now you're going to have the contractual issues. And then something that you have to consider also is if you have a managed service provider, they can potentially damage your IT brand, your customer service experience, the quality of the service, and it can have a very negative impact for IT and for the business, right? So in my humble opinion, it comes down to having very realistic expectation. What is the managed service provider is going to be doing, and make sure that you have processes on how to manage them. Thank you for your time, and Katie, back to you.
Thank you, Andre. Appreciate it. Just a real quick note so everyone knows, we're going to go through these intros and then we're going to have the panel where all of them will be on stage at the same time. If any questions come into your head while we're going through this, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A tab, not the chat, but the Q&A tab, and we'll keep track and talk, as we get through this, but we'll go ahead and collect some of those if you don't mind. Next, we have Michael, who you met earlier, but Michael Swiencki serves as the Vice President of Managed Services for RoundTower. He brings more than 18 years of experience, has overall leadership and responsibility for the managed services business, including strategy, marketing, delivery, and operations. He leads the teams that are focused on ongoing operational and administrative activities within customer environments, such as 24/7/365 support for public and private cloud, compute, virtualization, network storage, data protection, operating systems, Office 365, security operations, service desk, client services, and applications. It's a mouthful there, Michael. Prior to joining RoundTower, Michael serves in several roles in a broad spectrum of industries to include IT consulting, managed services, and publicly traded corporate organizations. Michael, please.
I appreciate that. A piece of me thought that was just going to be, visual, not. So I do apologize for the mouthful. I wanted to make sure that there was enough context and tags there, if you will, as far as, RoundTower and our managed services. So I love the conversation so far. That Andy and Andre has brought, and I would like to say, first, a lot of Andre brought to the conversation is certainly valid, and I actually took some notes here that we can I'm going to reflect on in the future. But Just a little bit about myself and the perspective that I bring to this conversation is I started in the IT consulting group over 18 years ago, and it was before you really called it a managed service provider. It was more break fix consulting type of activity, and I switched and did about eight to 9 years on the corporate side, building out data centers and doing a whole bunch of crazy things with public and privately traded organizations. So during my tenure, obviously before and during on my client journey, I've had experiences with managed service providers, and I certainly had that firsthand as far as interacting and understanding what good looked like, and really it gave me a better appreciation for when I went back to the service provider side, specifically managed service provider side, as to what I would be looking for if I was in the client's shoes. So I think that brings a unique perspective to the way that I run managed services here at RoundTower. I've been here for 5 years. When I began, it was very much like a one-to-one type of residency model where folks were directly attached or assigned to a particular organization, and that was a remote service. And what I did was I took that and expanded upon that, and really built a platform that's truly a shared service managed services model that is 24/7 natively, to really provide that value back to our clients. So in the very beginning, in my intro, I talked through some components as far as having the right staff and the right talent. Sometimes you just need that expert for a very short period of time, and then the either the issue's gone or the solution, right, it's resolved, and that's what you get from a managed service as well, because I'm burdening the cost of these expensive resources, and really providing a cost. In RoundTower's view, it's an all-in cost for everything that we're looking to provide. So there's very few exceptions to that as far as scope or T&M types of activities. We try to make sure that everything fits in this box, and as far as the cost is concerned, so it's not going to fluctuate month over month unless something drastically changes within the environment. But that said, if we run into a problem and the folks that are normally supporting an organization's environment is having a challenge, we have the greater of RoundTower, from consulting organizations to professional services that are out there in the field, that we can pull in and really help that problem or help solution something for a client. And then then they're back to the project or delivery, whatever they were doing beforehand, and that's no additional cost to that. So I felt that was a good soundbite that I wanted to pull from Andre's conversation, as far as making sure that we have, right, the RoundTower and MSPs have that capability of being able to pull in more resources when necessary and have that expansive staff. We're not in the business of nickel and diming. We focus tremendously on customer experience and satisfaction. Our NPS is 95, our CSAT's 96%. I can go into detail if there's any questions around those two stats or figures, but we stack up very well against industry well-known names. And so that's the number one thing. The number two thing is we look for ways that it's easy for us to do business and provide value to our clients. And what I mean by that is not only having the services and capabilities that Katie walked through, as far as all the different towers of technology that we have, but it's focusing on things like compliance. We work with a lot of healthcare organizations, a lot of organizations that are publicly traded. So we have our SOC 2, we have our ISO 27001, right? We look to ways that we can make it so it's an easier decision. So it's more about building that relationship and that trust between our organizations, more than it is to say, whether or not we can actually bite off what we can chew there, right? So, and last, and before I hand it back here, we work with a lot of different organizations, and one of the things that we pride ourselves in is process and overall continual services improvement and maturity for organizations. So we have these processes in place, these ITIL-based processes, and we're taking organizations from chaotic or reactive types of solutioning or IT management, and pulling them into that proactive and really that service led type of environment. So you're not focused on, what's broken. You're focused on, how can I get out there and make IT relevant for my business, and how can IT accelerate our business and our objectives as an organization, and really have IT running seamlessly in the background. And yeah, that's what I have for my intro. So I appreciate the time, and I will hand it back to Katie.
Thanks, Michael. Great. Well, last but not least is Paul Sponcia. Paul is a 20-year Knoxville entrepreneur with a background in startup, social not-for-profit entrepreneurship, business leadership, information technology, consulting, and executive experience. Currently, Paul is a principal and the CEO of the IT company, a local managed IT provider, and with his wife is the owner of Hard Knocks Pizza. If you guys haven't had the pizza yet, it's really good. Check it out. Paul, please come on stage and speak for a moment.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, it's funny. Most people get more excited about Hard Knocks than they do the IT company, which I completely understand, even though I have very little to do with it except my wife. So anyhow, I've been in this industry a long time. I think just some quick background: the IT company's been around since 2003. We really do two main things, which is fully outsourced IT, and speaking about I guess listen to what Andy and Andre said. So fully outsourced IT, and then co-managed IT, where we would partner with typically large organizations that have an IT department to be able to sort of augment whatever it is they're doing in specific areas. An example of that, this was years ago, but a pretty large organization locally that everyone would know came to us and said, "Hey, we're losing a couple of people from our kind of our tier 3 NOC services. Can you sort of fill in for the next year while we figure out how we're going to handle that going forward?" And so it's not something we do a lot of, but it was an area where we were able to augment that team and provide them with a higher level of resources for a period of time. So it's an example of how a managed service provider can really step in. And I think going a lot on what Andy said, one of the critical things I think for people to really think about and remember just in IT in general, because I think we tend to a lot of times maybe even overlook or marginalize the value, is that there is no way for any one person or really any one team to know everything. Even though we do what we do, we're not experts in DevOps, for example. And there's IT teams or an individual who runs IT for a medium-sized organization, and there's no way they can get to everything that needs to be done, as well as supporting end users and et cetera. So that's really where partnering with someone on the managed IT side can start to create some leverage. There's risk mitigation in that. There is opportunity to leverage the business higher for higher value. And that's really the area that I want to encourage people to really think of when you're thinking about selecting an IT provider, somebody for managed IT, whether it's a very focused specific thing or it's taking over IT as a whole, is what is it that is the business outcome that you're trying to achieve? And I think people forget about that a lot, because for the most part, what we're faced with when someone calls us is some type of pain that they're in. Something's not working, something's not going the way they want it to be, and they're just trying to really solve that pain, which is super critical and super important. But the second piece of that, and really just tying that piece together, is really understanding what is the outcome that I want. Because from a managed service provider perspective, we may have a very specific way of doing things, and if we can't really understand the outcome that the customer is trying to achieve above just answer the call when I call you, that's difficult to really create success and have a good success scenario. And then there's all kinds of things that have to do with providing and really translating that value that we're delivering back to the business so people understand it. So if the business outcome is, when we try to get support, it takes 2 days, and we need that to be 4 hours, and that's going to create this outcome. It's important for the partner to understand that, so they can measure themselves against that outcome, help you understand how they're achieving that, and then begin to dig in with you and find new ways to achieve higher outcomes. Because if you're just spending money on it to get just one outcome, you may be throwing away money or opportunity costs that you could achieve. And that word I use is leverage, where you could leverage technology in ways that you never thought of before. So that's really all I have at the moment. I think the most important thing next is just hearing from people and what your questions are. So I appreciate the chance to be here.
Thank you, Paul. Great. Well, it is time for everyone to please join the stage with me. And it looks like you guys are already putting some Q&A questions on the side. So once we have everyone up and I get my screen fixed, we will be good to go. All right, great. And I'm just going to let all of you jump in as you want, but we'll go and we'll start in the order of how they're asking. So how do you see the MSP industry evolving in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I'll start. You know, I'm a part of a peer group. I don't know if Michael's organization is part of industry peer groups or not, but I'm part of a peer group of 250 other companies who are in the MSP industry who are talking all the time. That is a topic of debate. A lot of it, at least a lot of what we hear, is a combination of this idea of really trying to help, what I was talking about, help people tie the relationship that we deliver back to business outcomes and business value instead of just the technical nuts and bolts. And the technical nuts and bolts are super critical, to that, as well as just, security is becoming more critical. Obviously, Katie, the world you guys live in, and it's not enough to say we don't do that anymore. I mean, every MSP's got to have a component of that. It's not really a question of, do you provide security? It's what are you doing around that? So those are two of the things I think of, as well as stuff like DevOps. I mentioned that, but there's a lot going on in our world that is evolving really fast. It's hard to put your finger on what it's going to look like 5 years from now.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of those, same points that Paul just made, at least from my perspective. And what I see is, a lot more of the development and becoming more service-like in regards to IT, and bringing some of the more value-added types of solutions to organizations, right? So that's what I see as far as how MSPs are transitioning, is being a less of the I'll manage what you have versus I will provide you and service a solution. So that's at least for RoundTower, that's a big driver for us. Organizations want to consume things in a cloud-like manner, or as just like organizations, they purchase assets and they depreciate after 3 to 5 years, right? In that same model, except at the end of it, you don't have a depreciated asset. You have more of a solution that grows with you, can expand with you, and will also upgrade and update with you. And having that MSP be the real vested interest partner in that, and that outcome to the client, right? That's what we're seeing a lot more drive towards across the spectrum as far as the organizations that we work with.
Anyone else have anything to add? Getting shaking heads? No? All right, good.
One thing, just to bounce off what Michael said a little bit more, is a great example of that, I think, is, I can't remember if it was Andy or Andre, it might have been Michael, who mentioned Microsoft 365. And, that's an example of a tool that people buy, they turn on, they start using it, and there's two things. They don't think about security. And the second piece is the value that can be extracted from beyond just email and video collaboration. And so I think a good managed service provider, that's just a small example, but a good managed service provider should be entering into that gap and saying, hey, let me help you understand how to really maximize this thing that you're actually already paying for, and and to really take advantage and harness and unlock the power and potential of something like that. I'm sure Andy and Andre, I'm sure in their world, I can imagine that the partners they're working with, I mean, I think of what Andre said about the Salesforce partner. I'm certain that hopefully that partner is not just sitting there waiting for Andre to make a call, that they're saying, hey, here's some technology that you guys should be taking advantage of. So I think if we've got to be helping people, and if you're on the other side of it as the consumer or as the customer, you should be asking, like, what are you doing, or what are the areas that you're helping me take advantage? That's what I was talking about with outcomes. What are the areas you're helping me leverage what I have, or expose me to things that I don't even know about that are going to help me go further, faster, make more money, save expenses, not hire any more resources, but go further. So.
Okay, great for that additional information. Hey, just a quick reminder, if you're not talking during this, just make sure you mute out so we don't get any background noise there, if you don't mind. Okay, next question. How do you ensure the technical knowledge is maintained within the organization and not lost when that managed IT provider leaves?
I can take that one. Yeah, so ideally what we want to do is make sure it's part of the scope of the statement of work to force the MSP to constantly update your knowledge base, whatever that is. It may be Atlassian Confluence, it may be SharePoint, it may be some wiki, but make sure, all the artifacts are stored in your knowledge base, your architectural diagrams, the run book, the builds that they've done, the how-tos. So everything is stored in your knowledge base.
Yeah, and I know, Andy, I saw you just on mute again. Sorry, real quick. I'll just be quick. Yeah, and that's important too. It is, especially when it's your assets, when it's the client's assets. You want to make sure that those are something that you're retaining, because it's your intellectual property to a certain extent, right? It's your server names, it's your contact information, it's your DR or BC plan, right? That they're responsible for carrying out a section of it, but it's really the organization's. When it moves into like SaaS-based or IaaS or these other components, right, you stretch into that other side where it's the provider's intellectual property. So you want to make sure that part of the offboarding, or even in the contract, that there's something stipulated in there as far as different types of documentation that's very specific to your organization is deleted, right? These are usually things that are covered in MSAs, but just to keep that part covered. But that anything process related that's specific to that organization is documented and kept in a central located area and is reviewed on a basis. And that's something that you would typically see in an SOW. So.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of along those lines. One is, have a plan, right? Decide before you get into one of these, like, what's your plan going to be, right? Your plan could be, I'm going to maintain a minimal amount of staffing, but I'm going to partner closely with the service provider to ensure that they maintain, sort of either a technical lead, an architect, or even a hands-on. And that should be part of the contract, that there's an agreement that you're going to have the staff, and that there's going to be knowledge sharing that consistently happens between those two. Or is it going to be, we're going to, we want that documentation created and updated, and it's probably depending on what it is, right? And what's the value to your organization? Should you be auditing those on a reoccurring basis? And let's pull one of these things off once a quarter and actually try to run through it without them. It's kind of like a good DR plan, right? If your system admins are the ones running your DR plan, that's probably not your best idea, right? Because depending on the type of disaster, again, depending on the type of disaster, your system admin might not be the one that's available to run that plan. You need to take that thing, hand it to somebody else who hasn't been involved, and see if they can actually follow it. The other thing Michael touched on as well, I think that is good, is not that we all want to become lawyers, right? That's not why all of us got into this thing, but to a certain degree, like that stuff's important. Is putting something in the contract that actually talks about the exit of the service provider at some point. Maybe it's a match made in heaven and that never happens, or it doesn't happen when you're around, but it should still be there of the, this is the prenup. Like, let's talk about what the breakup looks like, and let's talk about the responsibilities that the MSP has to transition knowledge to a new MSP or to an internal individual. And like, let's have those conversations up front so it's real clear, like, what's the timeline we're talking about? What's the responsibility for documentation? How do we expect you to work with the new vendor that may replace you at some point? And kind of being deliberate about having that plan up front, and thinking about it is probably the most important thing you can do. If you're 2 years into a relationship and that's the point you're starting to think about it, it's going to be a pretty hard to crawl back from that.
Yeah, something I would add to that, really coming off all of that, is a lot of what these guys are talking about too has a lot to do with the operational maturity of the organization. So there's one of the challenges I think in our industry is that there is no not like as a CPA or a lawyer or something where there's really a true like independent, this is a managed service provider. There's a couple kind of out there, but nothing at the highest level of the industry. So it's sort of anybody can kind of say, hey, I went and did this and bought some tools and now I'm a managed service provider. But understanding, even with what these guys said, I mean, you can write in the SOW and they can say yes to it, but they may not be able to actually execute, on that when it's all said and done. So, a lot of owners are great salespeople who can tell people, yeah, we can do that. And so understanding how operationally and organizationally mature the partner you're choosing is, so I think Michael mentioned a SOC 2, that's a great example. We have a SOC 2, like asking some of these key questions, getting some of that stuff, man, the breaking up is hard to do. Prenup is a fantastic idea. We actually have it in our agreements for that reason, because I'd like to think that we'll be with the company forever, but that's not the reality. So I just want to harp on that, like operational, organizational maturity and asking the right questions so that you can gauge that is so critical.
Anyone have anything to add?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think Paul, you touched on the SOC 2, right? I mean, those are investments that organizations and MSPs make, and really the reason why that's important to both Paul and I is because it takes a lot of maturity organizationally inside of the MSP to actually achieve those types of certifications, and so there's time and energy, but there's that maturity piece too, right? So and that's a pretty good sign, right? If organizations, MSPs have been investing in those types of things and having external auditors come in and really ensure, right? Those are pretty key. But I mean, there's a lot of small MSPs out there where that investment is going to be very difficult for them to make, or it may not make sense for them at that particular time. I wouldn't discount them, right? Because I've been there, right? It takes time to get it a SOC 2, right? But that just from my perspective means that more or further due diligence is required when you're selecting that, and that partnership is established before contracts are typically signed. I mean, that's my only advice there. I mean, there's a lot of great MSPs or service providers out there that are, especially in niche markets, as far as focus is concerned, that have that talent and have that capability, but they're just not big enough to make that spend.
Another great thing just to ask and think about is, especially in the world we live in today, is insurance. Honestly, I mean, a managed service provider theoretically has access to a lot, and there have been some very publicized cases of some very well-known MSPs who have been compromised, and so controls, are critical, which goes back to SOC 2 or whatever. You can, as Michael said, somebody can demonstrate their controls to you without having to provide a SOC 2. But then insurance is just a very critical piece, because the last thing you want is for something to happen. They're like, I got $500,000, sorry, and then it's gonna be a tough day.
Yeah, agreed. I think those are all very good points. Well, if no one else has something on that, then we'll move on to the next. And I think we touch on some of these just with some of those points, but how can I measure the performance of a managed IT partner on a regular basis?
So I can take at least the first stab at this question. So a few things. One, when you're looking for a managed service provider for managed IT or really any types of service, one of the suggestions I have is looking for a partner that's transparent with their service delivery. You have visibility into tickets at a minimum, or workload, right, as far as that's coming from your organization to the MSP. But more importantly, if they're using things like monitoring tools or reporting, right, that those are something that they provide to you and access, provide for the client. A great example is we have an infrastructure monitoring tool that monitors everything from cloud all the way to on-prem infrastructure, and that's fully visible to the client. They can see if we're not doing our job, right? They can see if there's a big red X and there's been a ticket open and this has been going on for 4 days, right? They can see that. So that's one way to measure it. It's more point of time type of components. The more proactive management is ensuring that you're meeting on a regular cadence. The biggest thing that I see is when MSPs are not meeting with their clients regularly, whether that be weekly or monthly or at a minimum quarterly, right? Having quarterly business reviews. Here's what we've been doing. Here's what we see. Here's our recommendations, right? Having that point of contact and getting together to discuss so things don't fester. If there are any frustrations or any feelings that might be there. And sometimes data really does prove out, some of the feelings that might be heard or seen, right? We've all been there. Client and end users are like, hey, my stuff's not working, they're frustrated or whatever, right? But it could be an isolated event, or it could be something that, that we turned around that ticket in an hour and they wished it was a minute, right? So there's different circumstances for everything, but really having that visibility and transparency into the service and having that 360 type of conversation with the client is or the service provider is important.
Yeah, I would echo what Michael said. Having regular performance reviews, whatever the cadence it is, monthly, quarterly, it's huge. It's highly valuable to me because if I'm outsourcing operations, they can show me from the different tools how we did, how many outages we had, how many issues and everything else. And if it's an end user support, like what is my customer satisfaction? They can send out surveys and show me the results. So I definitely agree with what Michael said.
One of the things to consider too, it sounds kind of crazy coming from a managed service provider, but is to engage in some regular independent third-party assessment, of what you're doing. I think one of the neat things about working with banks is they have to do that. They have to have that done. So, and if you do that knowing that even the best managed service provider can't, it's just impossible, to be 100% successful all the time and to never miss anything, so understanding that assessment is also going to uncover things that's going to help everybody get better on a regular basis. So if you can, there's a cost factor to this, so I get it, but if you can do that on some, every 2 years or whatever, to have an assessment done, an audit done, to make sure that that actually what's going on is being performed, and it just helps you to validate that they're performing. Because I can, again, the MSP can give you data, but you're not pulling the data, they're pulling the data. So it's important to actually have somebody that can be independent to look at too, in my opinion.
You're right, Paul. That is crazy coming from an MSP. No, but I mean, it's absolutely true. I mean, but I wanted to look back at one of Andre's points that he was making there as well, and that service transparency is incredibly important, right? And having that visibility. Also, Paul, you made that point too, right? Pulling the data, right? Making sure that the client has access to that is extremely important and valuable, so they can dig in as deep as they want. But yeah, you're absolutely right as far as the independent review, or at least taking that step back, saying, is this really giving me what I was looking for when I went? Almost like a project charter. right? It's I know in large organizations they do this a lot, but project charter, you really decide this is the reason why I'm going down this venture, and then why I'm making this investment, and then reflecting on that and making sure that it still meets the requirements, right? I mean, you can even do that internally as well, right? With a group or a panel of individuals within your organization that can give you honest feedback. So
anyone else? Good? All right, let's move on to the next. What have been some of the challenges you have seen during our real life business continuity test over these last few months? I'm sure everyone's jumping for this.
What challenges? I don't know. It's been fine.
So
I think it's actually been, it's gone way better than I could have imagined. For as bad as it could have been, for us at least, it really, really well. It's a little bit awkward to tell 1,000 people to grab your desktop and your monitor and like, we're leaving, and then trying to get those people set up at home. We were fortunate enough that about 3 weeks before everything shut down, we actually started really getting prepared. And if anybody remembers, 3 weeks before we shut down, none of us could have imagined us shutting down. So, it kind of came on fast. But it's the remote support has been interesting, right? I think the technology organizations themselves work really well from home. But when you end up with like, how do I support a call center person and try to tell them how to plug their computer into the wall, or how, what is a Cat5 cable, and how to, some of those got, real interesting phone calls, and how do you actually support people in a remote manner that are not necessarily the most technically savvy.
So I would say from our perspective, we've definitely seen a varying challenges across all the organizations that we serve. One of the biggest challenges, besides what Andy just mentioned, which is absolutely true, right? Taking, physical handsets home and trying to figure out how to plug this into their network, that doesn't work, right? I mean, you got to think about this stuff before you just, go and do it sometimes. But was really some of the solutions and investments that organizations made were really geared towards, no one's ever going to leave the organization. Everyone's going to be VPN'd in, or, everyone's going to be here at this office, right? So when you talk about things like security, which is a big portion of our growing portfolio within managed services, is getting to that end point. So now all of a sudden, you used to have IT staff locally that could come walk up and help you. Now you don't. And organizations really making sure that they have access to that endpoint at a minimum, but visibility into what that endpoint's doing on a daily basis, right? Desktops, laptops, they all went home now. Well, now they're in an environment where people are used to doing certain things and having certain types of behaviors because they're in their home setting, and they don't think about that this is a corporate asset. So, introducing certain things into we saw phishing attacks go skyrocketing up across the board. Certain ones having success, right? So it's, we saw a lot of education that needed to happen, and continuous education around that, but also other tool sets to get to that endpoint, so we can monitor security.
I think the thing that we probably on the positive side, the thing that has been really outside of what Andy said, just how well it's gone, is just, I think a lot of the push that just taking our organization had made towards our customers for utilizing, even just for basic file sharing and stuff, using things like Microsoft 365 and Teams and SharePoint and stuff like that, kind of was a great platform for people to be able to do things that they didn't think they would be able to do in a lot easier fashion. I think one of the most interesting challenges that we encountered was, and maybe a miss on our part, was not really helping people understand how locked you may be to a physical phone, even though it may be a VoIP solution, and we moved away from, 2 or 3 years ago, I was like really, and my team did not want to do it. I was really adamant that I want no phone. I don't want a phone on a desk. I want to be able to make my mobile device or my laptop be my phone. And we did that. And so as an organization, we were in great shape, but there was a lot of customers who were using VoIP systems, but it was going to require VPN or some way to get back into the head-end unit versus a true cloud-based phone system that would have just been a lot easier to use and to utilize. That was probably the biggest thing that we saw as something that we could really help, outside of just crisis management and crisis and continuity planning at a larger scale for a pandemic that nobody really was preparing for. But yeah, that was a big.
Okay, I don't think anybody else is jumping to it, so we'll move on to the next. Next question, what are the most important success factors when partnering with an MSP to support business growth and expansion? And I know both Andy and Andre have lots of expansion going on, so I'm sure you guys have something to add to this.
I don't want to beat the same drum, but it feels like I've given this answer. You got to plan for it, right? Have those conversations up front, on what does change management look like with the provider, whether it's a volume thing and like how's price going to change as things go up, or just, what is your expectations around them being able to react to business needs, right? We can all talk about how disciplined we are and there's no fire drills and all that stuff until, well, actually, yeah, there are fire drills sometimes, right? And, like recognize those up front and talk about like, hey, how are we going to deal if this thing happens? Most people want to do the right thing. Most people want to be good partners. So, if you come in with a crazy request, oftentimes you'll get a like, hey, let's figure out what we can do. So some of those is about how do you make sure you're keeping good relationships so that if you do ask for a favor, that you've got the relationship to kind of fall back on when you do unfortunately have to do that. But a lot of it's open lines of communication, so you're not surprising people. If you can all prevent it, the degree you can sort of plan for how do you naturally expand this relationship as things change. Sort of if you didn't get the specifics down, at least you've given yourself sort of a structure to work from. It can make a lot of the conversations a little bit easier.
And just to add a little bit to what Andy said, it's asking that question when things happen, because they will, right? Not everything's going to be perfect throughout the whole relationship, or there's going to be issues. How does that provider, that MSP, respond to that, right? How good of a business partner are they going to be in those certain circumstances, or what are their processes on how they handle certain types of events, security events, infrastructure types of events, things like that? I think that's a great question to add. It's one of my favorite questions when in a pre-sales engagement, because it is typically something where they're thinking proactively as to either experiences that they have, and we're getting to that pain as far as what they've seen before, or it's really that they're thinking about the future as to, we're gonna be changing stuff, we're gonna be breaking some stuff along the way because we want to get to this certain business goal, and a lot's going to have to happen to get there. So how are you going to be that partner with us when everything is moving in that that direction?
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with Andy and Michael 100%. What I'm looking for is not just someone to come here and do staff augmentation or just to knock out some project. I'm truly looking for a strategic partner, right? So like Andy said, that plan is huge. So that MSP that understands my environment, understands my challenges, understands my gaps, and help me create a transition and a transformation plan. It may not be 3 months from now, it may not be 6 months from now, but okay, hey, in 2021, we got to tackle this. If you want to mature, or you want to, civilize your environment, or whatever it may be that you're looking for, that strategic partnership, it's critical in planning how you're going to get there.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to that. What especially Andre and Andy are saying is like this idea of what's the business outcome, and I think especially at the SME level, it's one of the challenges we see a lot that's critical to having a good relationship is being aligned with the folks that are in charge of the budget as well. Like I would imagine Andre and Andy are probably have budget responsibility for what they're spending. But if you're dealing with an IT manager who ultimately doesn't have budget responsibility, you know, and then to take their example, the company grows and there's not a real understanding that as you grow, the cost may have a linear component to your growth because there's licensing and, you know, whatever else goes with it. It can get sideways really quick. And so, you know, having alignment with whoever is responsible for the outcomes and its financial responsibility, I think, is really, really super critical. And understanding, you know, exactly what Andre and Andy and Michael said, like, what is it you're trying to accomplish? And then what's the measurement for you accomplishing that and us helping you accomplish that as the managed service provider? And then the cadence that Michael talked about on a regular basis of going back and saying, here's where, you know, you wanted to be 30% along, we're 35% along, or we're 20% along. So working through that is super critical, and communicating all that in the process is important.
Thank you all. Great answers. Okay, next question. And just for a clock check, we've got about 7 to 10 minutes left for questions. So next one, how can managed IT improve my environment stability?
I'll start. I feel like this is a trick question only because my initial answer is, I mean, generally it can't, unless you know, if you have an unstable environment and you ask an MSP to come manage that unstable environment, they're probably just going to be managing an unstable environment, you know. So I think that the other side of that is that I think to go back to, I think what Michael said, a good managed service provider is going to come in and evaluate and immediately make recommendations. And potentially, I think if they're really good, they're probably going to say, hey, I don't know if I can perform to the level you're asking me to perform if we don't make the following changes, because you're asking me to manage something that you're basically asking me to take over something that you're having a problem with in hopes that I'm going to, was the definition of insanity, right? is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So that's a really critical piece, in my opinion, is making sure that there's really good dialogue about, hey, I don't know that just hiring me is going to make it more stable. It might, but it's really going to be us evaluating it and saying, hey, here's the things that need to happen to get this level of stability that you want, you know, and then it's going to be really stable going forward.
You know, I'll echo what Paul said, you know, that again, that partnership with your MSP to do an assessment and what is critical, what is the most critical initiative that you need to tackle, you know, to stabilize the environment and bring the maturity that you need. You know, typically what I can say is the MSPs, they provide very highly knowledgeable talent where you may have a talent gap within your team. So bringing that MSP that can quickly do an assessment or say, okay, you're trying to address this network issue that you're having. They may have some people that are a lot more knowledgeable than you have. So again, it's that partnership with your MSP that's critical.
We had an interesting situation that points to a little bit of what Andre's saying is, and this is a little addition to what I said, is part of that too is that a strong MSP may say, hey, I don't know, but if you'll give me, you know, some time to put my technology, my tools, my processes in place, there may be things I can uncover to help you improve the stability. So we took over an account at one point that had been having the same problem for 4 years. And it really had to do with the change. And because they changed and they got a new fresh set of eyes on it and different tools, and, you know, that problem was uncovered and that problem was solved. And it actually, if the other MSP probably had solved the problem, they may have never switched. But it's that type of stuff that, you know, a quality company will come in and do what Andre said, an assessment, put the technologies in place, and come back and say, hey, here's the things we see. And if you do these 5 things, you're just, you know, you're going to improve, you know, tenfold, and therefore be extremely stable and have better outcomes.
add a little to that too, right? Because in the term MSP is almost used in different types of contexts across the industry, which is quite frustrating to an MSP, because in some cases they're some of our what we would, Paul and I would consider competitors are doing more of an FTE model where they're assigning, there's a scope of work maybe to say that we're going to do these things. But at the end of the contract, it's really you're signing up for these three people. That's it. I mean, what those three people can do is what those three people can do. So when we talk about stability, you really want to make sure that you're looking at an MSP that has that expansive offering. I mean, that has that ability to use the greater of that organization, or let's say you're having a network issue, right? And it just so happens to be a network issue to one of your critical web servers, your e-commerce types of systems. Having an MSP that's doing your network is great, and then you have maybe an application person that's pointing back saying, hey, it's a network issue. Well, it's always a network issue, right? Until it's not. And but the MSP having maybe that expertise or capability to say, hey, I got a Wintel team. Let's pull them into this conversation. Let's see if they can add any value to this and try to again resolve that problem. So when we talk about stability, sometimes it expands beyond just the necessary scope of services that you're signed up for, and having some contextual understanding outside of what they're doing for you, right, could be extremely powerful to getting you to a more stable platform. But yeah, Paul, he was spot on as far as if you're taking over an unstable environment. I mean, it's especially if you were told something different walking into it, it certainly gets very challenging, and some hard conversations sometimes happen. But yeah, I mean, it is about that overall process and the people and the capabilities that they have to offer.
Yeah, certainly not contradictory, but just trying to complement things that, and a lot of our, to Michael's point, MSP means different things to different people, and there's all kinds of, but a lot of our questions and answers seem to focus around like operational processes, whether it's networking or, kind of more of the back-end system administration, right? You can have MSPs in other places, but it's more common in those back-end. One of the biggest things I'm going to look for is process discipline, right? That's what I expect from an MSP, right? Because back to I'm hiring these three people, and if one of those people walk out the door, I'm in deep trouble, right? You want institutional knowledge, institutional processes. And those processes often materialize as tools, right, where they've automated things, right? That is a process. It's just that, that tool now automates that for you, as well as, monitoring and reporting to prove that the processes are consistently being executed and checked up on. And that's where I think you can get some stability. It's, hiring an MSP is not going to fix bad code, right? But it should actually give you a consistent foundation from those changes moving forward, where you could actually see that system stability improve over time. But oftentimes it's not going to be a magic, there's no magic wand that it's going to, just fix every problem because you switch the person in the seat. But I think the discipline those companies have, because they do realize they need to be resilient to an individual walking out the door. They need to be able to plug another person in and be able to still meet all of their SLA commitments. You typically see that higher level of discipline from an MSP that I think can get you some stability oftentimes.
All right, great. Well, I have not gotten the word that we have to wrap up quite yet. So let's hit one more question. For hiring, what certifications do you look for on candidates' resumes?
I'm assuming the question is more geared towards the MSP or I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that, but you guys would have different.
Yeah, I think we would. Yeah, some of it's especially with an MSP, right? And if you have a multi-tiered approach to providing service, so you have a tier 1 through 3, 1 through 4, something like that. Sometimes that's a little bit of a catch-22, right? We like to pride ourselves on being able to hire people in with spunk and ambition, and put them on a path to success and get them through some of those certs before being able to join the team. But when you're looking at critical resources like tier 3, tier 4 types of engineers, you want those higher levels certifications, so they at least have been able to prove themselves. Almost like when we were just talking about maturity of an organization, right? You talk about SOC 2s, there's certain certs that you're expecting that bring that experience to the table, right? That you had to have been able to understand these concepts in order to receive that, and that's a good foundation and baseline. And I think by far that is way more important than any college degree or anything else that I've ever seen is either job experience in that particular field or having those certifications to back it. Right, those are, and when I'm hiring, those are the things I look for, way greater than anything that they might have learned in the classroom.
The main certification we look for is experience, and then because and not that certifications aren't important, they are important, but I think the challenge a lot of times in certifications is they're easier to obtain and more difficult to prove that you actually are good at what you do because you have a certification. I think we all, I see Andy with a smile, I think we've all probably encountered people that have a lot of things after their name, and then we have a conversation with them, we're like, I've never done anything. they've never done anything. And we've also encountered people who have a lot of things after their name and they're amazing, sharp, really, really good at what they do. And so I think, things like CISSP and, there are really good CISA, CISM, there's some really good certifications out there that prove a lot. And that's a lot of stuff. I think going back to Andy's kind of process discipline, I'm actually super interested in those type of things when we're hiring people, because a lot of what we do is apply discipline to very chaotic things. And those type of certifications are important for us to see or have. And then back to what Michael said, I put a higher value on experience, and then as a company, a higher value on things like ISO or things like a SOC 2 or things like high trust and stuff like that, where as an organization, you've proven that you deliver a certain way. And that means the people inside the organization are adhering to processes and process discipline, to use Andy's term, that show that the organization can perform.
Great. Well, if anyone doesn't have anything else to add, then we all really appreciate all of you panelists for giving us your feedback and your information around all of these questions. Thank you to all the attendees for coming to this event. I know that it's a little different to do these things virtually at this point, but hey, we're here and we're all together, so it's a good thing. Please remember to visit knoxtech.org, and it'll get you up to date with memberships, events, news, networking, etc. And just so everyone knows, this event will remain open for another 25 minutes until 1:30. So please feel free to go back and network around the tables. Thanks again to Lunch Pool and everyone that pulled this together.